All right, we're going to get started. So, principles of design is our next project. We're going to be studying what are the principles of design and how do we use them in our design process. So, my first question to you all, and this is an active, interactive lecture. How many design principles are there? Who can tell me how many design principles there are? Hmm? Are you all hearing me?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead and tell me. You can put it in the chat. Give me a number. Okay, I'm seeing 7, 5, 12, 6, 6, 7 or 11, 12. What other guesses do we have? 5, 7, 12, 6, 6, 7 or 11, 5, 12, not sure, 7, 7, 13.
Seven. Sorry.
Well, here's the reality. It depends on who you ask or where you look. So here they are: alignment, hierarchy, contrast, repetition, proximity, balance, color, space, scale, pattern, emphasis, unity, similarity, uniform density, direction, closure, regions, objective, past experience, field, simplicity. Maybe more than you thought. We, however, are going to focus on the top 7. That doesn't mean there's only 7. It's just what we're going to focus on um, for our project, for what we're doing right now. So the the top most important principles I learned to master my career are looking at things like hierarchy, alignment, repetition, contrast, simplicity. Oops, hit too far. Balance. Hold on, I went out of it. Balance and proximity. All right, we're gonna keep going. Oh my goodness. No, I don't want to go back this way. Oh goodness. Let's go here. Okay, here we go. All right. So let's talk about hierarchy, the first design principle we're going to focus on. Hierarchy is one of the most critical principles of design. Like the term implies, um, that without establishing hierarchy, it's likely that individuals looking at a design will consider each element equally important. You can establish the hierarchy of these elements by manipulating any of the following 3 factors. So here you can see an example with no hierarchy, everything is the same. With hierarchy, our eye is going and looking at other areas. So, oh my gosh, my typeface isn't loading. That's why the type is saying hierarchy in a weird way. I didn't realize my typeface isn't working. So you guys are gonna have to ignore that for a minute. Some of our type isn't working right because my typeface isn't loaded. Um, so size is the first one. Size is people will pay attention to the biggest elements of a composition first, since it signals importance. So we want to look at the size. Here's a couple examples that are really showing us what are we looking at first in these first 2 examples. Who can tell me? What's the hierarchy of these examples? You can either turn your mic on or pop it into our chat. Okay, I'm seeing the font. There's something bigger on the page than the font. Yep, size is what we're talking about.
The
What's the
head.
first thing? The head. Yeah, the head. The head is the first thing we see. The first thing we see, even before the type, is the head for sure on the Jim Gaffigan one. On the don't vote one, it might be the word don't because it's in red and white and it's so big and it's kind of overlapping the head. But they both have these big heads in the middle. And then the secondary is the type. Um, and so, yeah, size is really playing a big part of this. Lots of big type and big heads. Let's keep going. So here we're looking at color. Color is the hierarchy we're using in this design. Whenever you want something to stand out, color comes in handy. For example, using high contrast colors for important text and icons will help them get noticed. So this is exactly what's happening in this website design. We're seeing that it's basically black and white, but the color yellow and this yellow orange are being used to have us pay attention to certain areas of type and of course all the buttons and the things that we can click on. So that's what is calling our eye to pay attention to is the color. And then position is the third one. An element's position within a design says a lot about its level of importance. Who can tell me what I mean by that in these two examples by Paula Scher?
The name is like the public is smaller and off to the side.
You think the public is what we're looking at for hierarchy?
No, like that's not as important.
The
If
type,
you
the
Not as
type
important, right?
yeah.
What is important?
was the bold color.
The bold color is definitely part of it. But what's happening with, I see Michelle is in the chat saying how the letters are positioned and the lady looks like the lady is yelling. She's yelling the letters, right? So the letters are literally coming out of her mouth on the woman one, right? So the hierarchy is the position of these letter forms positioned over her mouth. So it looks like she's yelling. What about on the other poster? There is no mouth. But what's happening with the title of the performance on these are theater posters, um, on the green one? What's happening there? What's catching our attention? What's the hierarchy of the position?
The hair's catching the attention.
The hair's catching the attention, but what's even more catching our attention? What's missing? We see hair, but nothing else, right? The him, there's no face. But where is the word him positioned? If there were a face, where is the hem on the face?
The
The
eyes.
eyes, the eyes, the eyes are, the word him is right where the eyes would be. So it's very specific. It's how we see him. The eyes are where the him is positioned where the eyes are supposed to be. We know it's a man because of the hair. There's no face. There's nothing else there but the word him right where the eyes are supposed to be. So that's very provocative. It's calling our attention. The position is making us focus on that. Excellent. Okay, we're looking at moving off of hierarchy. Um, our number two is alignment. Alignment is an important principle of design. It helps create a sharp, ordered appearance for ultimately better designs by ensuring your various elements have a pleasing connection with each other. We are looking here at examples of left, right, top, bottom, and center. These are four type of edge alignments. And we have the center alignment. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about like, how do we align things on the page? So let's look at some examples. So systems pervade graphic design, a grid system of interrelated characters, styles, sizes, and spaces. A grid system of columns, rows, and margin, each one addresses spatial relationships among visual elements. In the 60s and 70s, Massimo Vanelli's influential posters and information systems employed horizontal grid lines and visual and structural elements. Here's some examples of his designs where you can see he's actually taken the grid and have black lines going through the gutters of the horizontal lines within the grid. And then you can see the type and photos are now vertically interacting and intersecting those black, heavy horizontal lines. Let's look at another one. For the 10th Guangzhou biennial poster, the designers created a typographic system featuring 3 different weights and 5 different line breaks. Used together, the system allowed for the design to cover as much surface area of the poster with as much text as possible. For the Now Jump poster, the designers noticed the features artists where initials were within the title, so they highlighted them using a different font. The overall poster has tight alignment, and the break from the grid allows for the feature artist's name to be called out. So when you can see here is we're looking at everything aligning very strictly on a grid. And the smaller type that's on both of these, you can also see is aligning into that grid. And then we have a couple examples, especially in that Now Jump poster, where you see the little character of the guy jumping, it looks like between the N and the O. And then you have this angled type that's kind of breaking the grid. Really cause our attention to that alignment being broken. Number 3, repetition. Repetition is the recurrence of a design element, commonly utilized in patterns or textures. Repetitive elements can be used in conjunction with other principles to create a design that leads a user's eye to a focal point. It has continuality or flow of repetitive element could become repeated lines, shapes, forms, colors, or even design elements. Let's look at some examples. So here's an example of the complexities of COBOL programming language that was designed by Winkler in the mid-century. It was inviting simplicity, using repeating geometric forms to create a puzzle for the viewer to solve. You see, you were only seeing a quarter of the circles at the beginning of the poster, at the top of the poster. And then as we go down, you start seeing the circles be fully formed. And then you can eventually, on the 4th line down, you can read COBOL. So you're kind of understanding what it's actually trying to say. 50 years later, if you look at the poster next to it, the Hampton Dunlop's proposal for the 2028 Olympics in LA also uses repeating geometric forms to create the title of the poster. So here's an example, 50 years apart of each other, kind of a very similar design principle that's being used in both of these posters. Moving on to our 4th design principle, contrast. The difference between 2 or more objects in a design is referred to as contrast. The difference in objects could be light and dark, thin and thick, small and large, bright and dull, etc. Contrast is most commonly associated with readability, legibility, and accessibility. Like hierarchy, the most important elements in design should have the most contrast. A bright blue button on a stark white background with a lot of white space is considered high contrast. If the button was almost the same color as the background or was a 1-pixel stroke versus a fill, it would have less contrast. A text-based design could be high contrast by using black text on a white background. To dial down the contrast, you'd use gray text on a white background. An easy reminder is to think of a black and white photo. If the photo has a full range of white, gray, and black, it has high contrast. If the photo only goes from dull white to dark gray, it's a low contrast image. Let's look at some examples. Emory Douglas uses color, contrast, and scale expertly to communicate what he wants a viewer to pay attention to in his images for the Black Panther newspaper. So here you can see Everything is black and white until you get to the message he really wants to make sure you're reading. And that is where he uses color as a contrast in his black and white artwork. So here is an example of color contrast. Scale is relative. An object or image is only as big or small in relation to what it surrounds it. Designers use scale to change how things look and what they mean, activating our process of vision as well as our ability to read and interpret pictures in a narrative medium. Here you're seeing scale and layout being high contrast. In this Swiss poster, both the shape and scale of letter forms are graduating across the page, giving us an example of shape and scale for contrast. Moving on. Number 5, simplicity. Simplicity is the discipline of minimizing, refining, or editing back a design. More often than not in graphic design, keeping it simple works really well. As you all know, we just finished our first assignment, which was simplicity. So we consider simplicity to create balance and impact. Simple design is easier to understand and is more likely to make a lasting impression. When applying simplicity in a design, we should avoid an overwhelming amount of visual information. We want to try to get across a strong idea instead of incorporating many. So let's look at some examples. John Massey, based out of Chicago, was a leading practitioner of modernism for the corporate application as well as an influential educator. This poster for Herman Miller Furniture Company applies Hoffman's concept of graphic translation to interpret a piece of modernist furniture as an abstract icon. The poster contains no concrete information about the product. It literally just has this kind of blobs and black blobs going across the page. And it just says Eames, Soft Pad Group, Herman Miller. It doesn't show you a piece of furniture. It literally is just giving you an expression of what you will feel sitting on this soft padded furniture. It isn't showing us anything representational. The poster right next to it in yellow is by Malcolm Greer, a leading designer and influential educator at RISD. This one color poster was designed to be overprinted with information about specific events for the Guggenheim Museum. This is representational. It's showing us a very stylized graphic form of the famous Frank Lloyd Wright designed Guggenheim Museum in New York. It's very representational. Both are using simplicity, one not representational and one very representational. Here's another example. Albert Exertine's iconic TV posters represent to a new generation's response to a legacy of Swiss modernism. Albert plays with the idea of using reductive imagery to unlock the essence of a complex subject. His posters merge the international language of American television shows with modernist, high-minded international style. Now, what do you think? How many of you are familiar with The Simpsons or Mad Men? How about Game of Thrones? MacGyver or Sex and the City? What do you think about these very simplified representations of those television shows? Anyone? Any thoughts?
The MacGyver one, also The Simpsons.
Yeah.
The the hairs.
It's the hair, right? The Simpson is the hair.
The MacGyver symbolizes that he could take a pen apart and make a bomb out of it.
That's right. You can use a paper clip and make anything, do
Right.
anything with it. Yeah. Excellent. All right. So tricky to get that simple for such a complex thing as a television show. Well, let's look at our design principle number 6. It's balance. Balance is objects carry design weight just like the physical world, but it's now called visual weight. The visual weight of a design needs to have balance. That's like putting two objects on a seesaw. If one is too heavy, the viewer's eyes go directly to the heavy part. If it's weighted with all things equal, the seesaw is perfectly suspended without either side touching the ground. Balance can be implied by size, shape, or even contrast. While it can utilize symmetry or equality, balance can also be achieved through asymmetry. Think of asymmetry as the opposite of mirroring. Instead of seeing the reflection, you see something evenly distributes the elements. For example, three small objects can offset a visual weight of one large object, or a small dark and shaded object can often offset the visual weight of a large lighter element. Let's look at some examples. So here we have balance, symmetrical. This is a poster for the Titanic movie, perfectly symmetrical. The boat, the pictures of the two stars, the typeface, title, and the subhead, everything is perfectly centered in the entire piece, right? The asymmetrical balance. Here you are seeing balance through high contrast, often balancing objects, elements similar and equal weights rather than creating an identical mirrored image like the Titanic was. For example, several elements are balancing out the larger elements. Asymmetrical balance is more felt than seen. Create a sense of movement or tension within your design. This painting by Gerrit von Honthorst, the artist creates balance by using heavily contrasting darks and lights. Radial balance is designing a feature images, design elements emitting from a single focal point, almost like spokes on a wheel. Radial balance creates a strong focal point wherever your spokes converge. So this is three circles radiating out of the center. You can't help but look into the center pupil of this eyeball. Here's another example of radial balance, a little less intense as the first one. And here's another one using a grid. And design principle number 7, proximity. Place related elements near each other. Proximity is one of the most important grouping principles and can overpower competing visual cues such as similarity of color or shape. The practice of placing related elements close together and separating unrelated elements can be seen almost everywhere in design. White space separates the shapes into two distinct groupings through the principle of proximity. Even when including different shapes within each group, these two groupings are still clear. Using varying amounts of white space to either unite or separate elements is key to communicating meaningful groupings. In this example, you see one group of circles on the left. And in the second image, you see three groups or columns of circles. The only thing that changed is the distance or the proximity between some of the circles. Now, the proximity is stronger than other Gestalt principles. You can see here that the circles still appear grouped even when they differ in shape or color. Thus, proximity is stronger than, for example, the principle of similarity. So even though some are red and some are black, you still see in the second column, two columns of dots over grouping all the red and all the black. Let's look at it another way. Proximity can help you define the direction of the viewer's attention. So it really doesn't matter what color they are. Here you can either see rows or columns depending on the proximity of the elements. Right? So here we have the way we're spacing these rows or columns of dots determines what direction we're looking at. It's very strong. So people use this principle to organize different parts of design and to increase readability. Notice how these products are organized, their name, price, and description.
It's not vulgar. It's not like some serious damage going to be done.
I think someone might need to mute their.
I mean, you want it open? Yeah.
Ever.
There we go. So let's look at how we are looking at proximity and organizing. For example, it's used a lot in websites, right? Websites really have a lot of content to get through and they really need to organize. So here you can see examples of their these products, how they're organized. Notice their name, price, and description are deliberately placed close to each other. This way they're perceived as a group. Let's look at another example. You can imagine that a grouping of creative visual connections will also help you in creating focal points. Excuse me. You can arrange your elements so that certain parts stand out by simply using the proximity principle. Here we're looking at groupings of, for example, a website, and you can see how by grouping the people together in columns, the photos are in columns, they are staying grouped together in separating us from the buildings are in their own columns, and then here the people are in their columns. And proximity is also used here in app design in big time. It's how we're organizing elements on any interface. So basically looking at the pages, each page has different groupings. Either it's photos, avatars, buttons where you need to click, content. Everything is grouped into sections so that you can go through and functionally use the design of the interface. Okay, so let's look at where we're going to take this. So let me just stop share right there for a second. And before I get into that, any questions as we have just gone through the 7 principles of design? Hopefully you all wrote them down and kept some notes so you're ready, because we're going to be using these design principles in our next assignment. We're going to be doing the principles of design assignment. And I'm going to take a minute and walk us through. But before I do that, I want to see if there were any specific questions. Are these have you heard of some of these principles before? Is this all new? I can see Maddie's nodding. Anyone else? All right, Max, thank you. Yeah, I think you should have heard of some of these. You might not know all of them, but I mean, some of these transfer from other design and art disciplines. Yeah, not fully foreign. Okay. So let me share my screen again, and then let's go into what we're going to do next. What is happening? Why isn't that showing? Hold on a minute. Here we go. Bring this over. Voila. Okay. All right, here it is. So our objectives for the next project is to really have a good understanding of the principles of design, and we're going to implement them in our design. We're going to learn to identify the principles of design that we just went over. We're going to learn to see unique characteristics of each design principle, explore and experiment with the potential of combining principles, be able to identify and explain the design principle in examples presented, and develop a visual literacy. So we will be working with Adobe Illustrator once again. This is going to be creating a 1-page poster to introduce yourself as a creative. We're going to be focusing on the 7 principles of graphic design we reviewed in class. You will be incorporating at least 5 to 7 design principles, and you're going to fill out a given worksheet explaining which ones were used and where in the poster they apply. So not only are you going to have to use 5 to 7 of these principles in your design, you need to be able to tell us about it and how you're using them. This poster must include text and images to convey a clear message of who you are as a creative. This design is intended to create a layout format that's informative and still attractive to its viewer. And then here I repeat the 7 principles: alignment, repetition, simplicity, proximity, balance, contrast, and hierarchy. The first step of this process is going to be to brainstorm. We're going to be creating mind maps of ideas of what you want to share about yourself on your poster. Think of 5 adjectives that represent you. Use those 5 key words as the first level of spokes on your mind map. You will build your word list and mind map on your mural process board for project 3. Once you finish your mind map, choose your strongest idea to move forward with into sketching. So right here is our first process. And I'm going to just stop here because what we're going to do now, between now and the end of class, is we're going to start our brainstorming session together. And then you'll finish it at home. And when we come back to class on Thursday, you will have finished your mind map and we will be sharing it. And so we can help together choose our strongest ideas to move forward with for our posters. So I'm going to walk us through, what does it mean to create a mind map? I'm going to stop the share. And my question for you all is, how many of us have made a mind map before? Anyone make a mind map? Okay, I see 1, I see 2. 2, okay. 3, okay. So a couple of us, not many, it looks like. Not many. All right. Alan has. Okay, good. A few of us have. Perfect.